Welcome to another episode of Me and My Health Up. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today we're talking about a very different topic, and it's the surprising impacts of deuterium water on health, on your health. And so you probably haven't heard of deuterium water, and you're probably thinking, what the hell is Anthony talking about? It's also known as heavy water, and you may not have heard or come across heavy water. So today's episode is to talk about this whole concept of deuterium in our water and in our food and what health impact it's having on you and us as a population. We come across the rising rates of heart disease, the rising rates of mental health illness, ailments, and you hear about the rising, ever increasing rates of Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, heart disease, just to name a few. And then on top of that, you've got type 2 diabetes, cancer rates. You're probably wondering, is there something common behind this? And it's starting to emerge in terms of the quantum world. We're starting to understand health at a subatomic level. And it's this understanding of health at a subatomic level that's making a profound difference and giving us profound insight and understanding. For example, I had no idea of what was behind the success of a ketone diet or what's behind the success of intermittent fasting. I didn't really quite grasp it, but now it's becoming clearer through this deuterium subject. Yes, so let me define deuterium. So deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. So what is hydrogen? What's the relevance of hydrogen? It's one of the most plentiful atoms that exists in planet Earth, okay? It is everywhere. And it's what our body uses in order to create energy. It's part of the energy production process. And the reason why deuterium is concerning is when I say isotope, it's similar. It's hydrogen, but it's different. It's different at the physics level in terms of what is containing within it. So deuterium's still known as hydrogen, but it's an isotope. And the reason why it's different to protium, for example, which is what our body prefers to use, is protium. So it's where the hydrogen contains a proton and an orbiting electron. So a proton in the nucleus and an orbiting electron. Whereas deuterium in the nucleus has a proton, however, it's also got a neutron. And neutron and protons have the same atomic mass. Okay, so it's essentially twice as heavy, deuterium, because of having the neutron in the nucleus. So it behaves similarly, but different, if you understand what I mean. It's still defined as hydrogen, but it has different physical properties in terms of the way it interacts and how it binds to molecules. And so this is what we're exploring today, is this subject of how deuterium and excessive amounts of deuterium, hydrogen, in our system is really implicating our health. And in particular, it's implicating our energy systems. So if you're someone that's constantly fatigued, it could be excessive amounts of deuterium. If you're someone struggling to lose weight or have blood sugar issues, such as high blood glucose or high insulin, or you could have high leptin resistance, this is all tied in to this deuterium story. So listen in for some more insight. So what that does, that neutron in the nucleus of the hydrogen atom, is that it makes it twice as heavy. So deuterium water, so as a molecule, so hydrogen, two hydrogens bound to an oxygen forms water. So you've got the deuterium hydrogen bound to oxygen forming heavy water. Well, the deuterium atom is twice as heavy as the protium, which has just got the proton and the electron. Twice as heavy. Now, this becomes problematic when we're talking in terms of how our cells create energy. And you're probably wondering, well, where does deuterium fit into this? Well, deuterium is found naturally. It's naturally occurring in the environment. It's occurring at around 150 parts per million, which is equivalent to 2 drops in a liter of water. Okay, so it's quite small. But the issue is when it builds up in our body. So when it accumulates in our body, just like any heavy metal accumulating in our body, it becomes problematic. And the body then wants to find, what does it do with this excess deuterium? It can't use it as energy, and it's starting to build up. So it gets pushed. So the waste product of the deuterium is pushed into fat cells. Okay. And so this is the way the body keeps it. And this can be determined through MIR scans. So we can actually see this on the scans. Now, what is the implicating factor of having this heavy hydrogen in your system? So it's a real problem at the cellular level. So it becomes a problem with where in a cell, we have organelles within a cell. One of those organelles within the cell is the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is the powerhouse of our cell. It gives the cell energy. It allows the cell to replicate successfully. And these organelles, or this organelle, the mitochondria, has its own DNA, and it produces energy for the cell. How does it produce energy? Well, it does it through channeling electrons from food. So it channels electrons through a tunnel, and as the electrons move through the tunnel, that pushes the hydrogen up, out, or up a gradient, for example. It goes up a gradient. And then those protons that are going up the gradient, which is the hydrogen, and this is protium I'm referring to, that is then met with ATPase, which is an enzyme that creates ATP. And ATP is what we create within our cells that gives us the energy that we need for the cell and ultimately for life. And so when these protons are being pushed up the gradient, this ATPase is it starts getting the energy from it and creating ATP, which is our energy. Now, the problem is with hydrogen, or not with the heavy hydrogen, the deuterium, is that it clogs this process and it's too big to be moved. It's too heavy. It's like when you're riding a bike and someone puts a stick in the clogs. Like a small stick won't make a difference, but a large stick does. It stops the clogs turning. And so our mitochondria is moving electrons, moving protons. And this process that it does performs energy. And when we have something heavy that can't be moved, that is too big for the door to get in the door, then the body can't generate the energy as efficiently as it would. And the interesting thing is that I could never quite get my head around how the keto diet works, because our body can process carbohydrates, fats, and protein as energy, and there's also alcohol. So we can generate energy from any of these sources because they all contain hydrogen, right? However, the difference is that fats contain protium. It is very low, extremely low in deuterium, and the body can cope with fat much better than what it can cope with carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are much higher in deuterium. And so when we consume excessive carbohydrates, and this is the key to why the low carb diet is so effective, is because if we're consuming excessive amounts of carbohydrates, which contain deuterium or elevated levels of deuterium compared to fats, then our clogs, or our electron transport chain that generates the energy, gets clogged. It gets inefficient. And this is why we end up consuming carbohydrates but still feel tired and feel like we're consuming energy, and we should be able to produce energy, but we're still sluggish. We still feel tired and run down. And it's because our mitochondria has become really inefficient at utilizing or getting rid of the deuterium. So it has so much ability to cope with removing deuterium. So yes, our mitochondria, through the Krebs cycle, the TCA cycle, and that whole cycle actually is the process of removing deuterium and making sure that deuterium is replaced with protium, which is the hydrogen the body can utilize. And so we have this Krebs cycle, which is what the carbohydrates go through, and it goes through that cycle in order to remove the deuterium hydrogen and replace it with protium. And that way we don't clog up the mitochondria, or its ability to produce energy. We don't make it inefficient. And so what happens is when we're consuming excessive amounts of carbohydrates, our body can't cope with these excess quantities of deuterium. And so it needs to then move all these waste products somewhere in the body. And so what it does is move it into fat storage to get rid of it, to get it out of the system so that we can keep running. And so what happens is we continue to consume carbohydrates, but they're continually pushed into fat stores and we don't get the energy. We don't get the cellular energy. So we're consuming energy, but we're not allowing ourselves to create the energy our body needs for vitality. And so we are getting fatter, yet are not got the energy, and we're looking for more energy. And so we eat more carbohydrates. And so this is the story or the understanding that I didn't have. And I've only just started to get this understanding. And it's through the study of biology at the subatomic level. It's getting down into the electrons, protons, neutrons, quarks. It is getting down into that subatomic level that we always had this understanding of biology at a molecular level, but not an atomic and subatomic level. And so this is profound in terms of giving explanation as to why the keto diet works so well, because what we're doing is giving the body fuel that is deuterium depleted. So when we eat fats, and in particular, it's got to be grass-fed fats, like grass-fed animal fats are the best because they're the lowest in deuterium. Our body can utilize that fuel effectively because it's deuterium depleted or really low. And so we can make energy from that. And it's why people say when they're on their keto diet as to why they feel more alert. They can concentrate. They're not clouded. They're very focused. And they feel energized. They don't need to eat as much because their mitochondria is working efficiently. And when we have efficiently run systems, we don't need to keep eating to get energy. We've got this mitochondria that's utilizing the fuel more efficiently. And so I didn't understand this about the keto diet. So I used to have I didn't have a complete understanding. And it was only through this study of deuterium that I'm starting to get a more complete understanding of why the keto diet works and also why fasting works. So fasting is allowing the body to utilize fat stores. Okay, so these fat stores are where we're primarily getting our fuel. And so this is what marvels me, is that it's starting to explain that when we're primarily burning fuel, it's a good fuel source. Primarily burning fat as fuel, it's the best fuel source because it has more hydrogen, and particularly saturated fat has more protein than deuterium. That's what the mitochondria likes. That's what the mitochondria likes to use. And so I find this fascinating. It's starting to explain the whole dynamic around why intermittent fasting is working so well. I mean, obviously there's other benefits to intermittent fasting, but ultimately what it's doing is making the mitochondria get more efficient through not clogging it up with deuterium carbohydrates or deuterium-rich carbohydrates. So you're probably wanting to understand, how does this relate to health beyond obesity? Well, our heart, for example, is rich. It has high amounts of mitochondria per myocardial which is the muscle, the heart muscle cell. The heart muscle cell is rich in mitochondria. And so if we're loading our body with carbohydrates, and in particular deuterium, high rates of deuterium, our myocardial aren't working as effectively, and the heart begins to fail. And it's trying to use this deuterium-rich fuel, and it can't. It can't properly use it. And so what happens is that the body is then inefficient in terms of its operation, and hence why we have heart failure or arrhythmia, because our heart doesn't have the energy it needs to operate. It's an energy absorbing organ, right? It needs a lot of energy. And guess what the other organ is that is also rich in mitochondria? Think about thinking. Where does thinking come from? It's our brain. Our neurons, our nerve cells are rich in mitochondria. And so they also require a lot of fuel, and they don't work well off deuterium because the mitochondria, it doesn't allow the mitochondria to work efficiently. And so our brain is starved of good fuel, and these
neurons start to die off because they don't have the fuel to run, to function. And our mitochondrial start to die. So you can see how heart disease and brain disease is so prevalent. And it comes down to this whole thing around deuterium and carbohydrates. So with carbohydrates, it's hydrated carbons, right? So it's got a lot of water with the carbons, and our body doesn't like this type of water because it's deuterium rich. And the reason why the carbohydrates have a lot of this deuterium rich water is either through ultra processing, through manufacturing, and them using deuterium water in the processing of these carbohydrates, these refined carbohydrates, and also where the plant stores its deuterium, because the plant also uses a process called photosynthesis, which is different to we essentially are doing a reverse process to photosynthesis in order to create energy. The plants are taking in carbon dioxide and water, right? And then sunlight combined with sunlight, and then they produce carbohydrates and oxygen, right? So what happens is the plant also doesn't like deuterium, and what it does is push the deuterium to its energy stores. Like we have fat stores, right? It pushes the deuterium to its energy stores, which are fruit and the bulbs, the bulb, the tubulars, right? The potatoes, the sweet potatoes, the pumpkins, so the carrots. So these sort of root vegetables are rich in deuterium because that's where the plant stores its deuterium, because it doesn't want overindulgence of deuterium because it starts to create problems with its function. Same with us. So we push our excessive deuterium into fat stores in order to allow ourselves to keep running, but we're running depleted. And so the plants store its deuterium in these bulbular vegetables or tubular vegetables, the potatoes, sweet potatoes, pumpkin, and fruit. And so it's really incredible. So if we eat those starchy vegetables, and it's why the starchy vegetables are demonized now. It's carbohydrate story, but now you understand why the carbohydrates are becoming so problematic to us is because we consume too much of it. And what I'm not saying is not to eat potatoes I'm not saying you have to eliminate them from your diet, but the less you eat, and certainly if you've got any metabolic diseases, such as you've got type 2 diabetes, or you have any type of, sugar, high insulin, any of these types of metabolic diseases which end up manifesting into type 2 diabetes. And it's interesting. What's interesting about that is they're calling Alzheimer's like type 3 diabetes because they're realizing that it's a strong association with excessive carbohydrates as to why we predisposition to Alzheimer's or to dementia because of the excess carbohydrates, which break down to glucose. So it's excessive amounts of glucose in the blood and the body not being able to process it properly because the mitochondria can't cope with the overload of deuterium. It just won't work. It's too heavy. There's too much of it. And so, yes, our body can cope with small amounts of deuterium. It struggles with excessive consumptions, that accumulation, that constant bombardment of loads of carbs, loads of fruit. And so it's not that you can't eat fruit, but fruit needs to be eaten in real moderation, essentially. And same with the tubular vegetables, sweet potato, carrots, beetroot, they all store deuterium. So they're all high in deuterium. Oh, the other one that's also high in deuterium is chocolate. So that's concerning for me because I do love my chocolate. But again, it's moderation. So we need to, and particularly if you've got these metabolic diseases, that's when you really want to go low deuterium diet. And so what's a low deuterium diet? It's consuming a lot less carbohydrates, minimal carbohydrates to a point that you can get them to very low. And it's essentially getting into that ketosis, that state of ketosis. So that state of ketosis kicks in at around 20 grams of carbohydrates or less per day. So it's quite a small amount of carbohydrates. And the more you can stay in ketosis, the more you'll correct or heal from your metabolic disease because you start to allow the body to process the deuterium and to get rid of it. And how do we excrete deuterium? We excrete it through our metabolic waste processes. So through our urine, through the urea cycle in uric acid. We also, through our feces. So if we're regularly going to the toilet, that helps. Urinating helps. Breathing, we do it through our breath. That's a way in which we can excrete it, as well as through sweat. So if we're regularly exercising, getting a sweat up or doing saunas, this is part of the reason why saunas are so effective, is it helps us eliminate waste products, toxic products, heavy metals, such as heavy water. So it helps us push the heavy water out. We get the heavy water out through our breathing. We get it out through our doing our number twos and number ones. And so we want to make sure that is working well. And in order to make sure that works well, we need to exercise. We need to allow our system, our lymphatic system, to push the toxins out through these elimination pathways. And we do that. We drive the lymphatic system through exercise. So this is how it's all tying in. For example, during sleep, we flush out the toxins out of our brain. So that's really good to have a good night's sleep to get a clear out of the toxins in our brain. So we want to be having a good night's sleep. We want to be exercising. Saunas are going to help this in terms of getting the sweat out. Exercising helps get the sweat out. Also making sure that you're going to the toilet, you're moving your bowels, because that's a way in which we just, get out deuterium. So what is good in terms of, so I've just mentioned the foods that are high in deuterium, such as the fruits. So minimize fruits, minimize root tubular vegetables, and minimize chocolate, and carbohydrates. Any refined carbohydrates are big no-nos. So bread, all these refined pastas, refined carbohydrates are high in deuterium. Again, once you start to heal, your body will get more efficient, and by having a bit of more deuterium or introducing a bit more deuterium, your body will be able to process it. What we need to do is get the body system working and starting to to eliminate deuterium by minimizing the amount of deuterium coming in, allowing it to process the deuterium that's in the body, such as we want to burn our fat, and then we want to eliminate the deuterium that was stored with the fat. And we can do that by not bringing in more and more deuterium. Allows our body to cope with the levels that it's dealing with by minimizing what's coming in, allowing it to get rid of what's accumulated and excreted. And we can go through that elimination process and really bringing down the deuterium that has been accumulated in our bodies. So in terms of foods to eat, so what are the foods that are low in deuterium? Saturated fats are low in deuterium. But what's really important is also the light story that's starting to play into this as well. So we want to eat foods that are locally grown, grass-fed animal fat. So supporting your local farmers, making sure their livestock is roaming as much as it can, or it's got free will to roam, and it's grass-fed. That is then going to allow the animal to get rid of the deuterium from the grass for you. So you're then consuming deuterium-depleted fuel, deuterium-depleted or proteum, essentially proteum instead of deuterium in the water, or as the hydrogen bound to the carbon chain, which, as you're probably aware, fat is a long carbon chain, glucose much shorter carbon chain, and glucose has more water bound to it. Fat, obviously not. Fat and water don't go together. So saturated fats that are grass-fed, that are localized. And it's the light picture, but I won't talk about light in this podcast. On another episode, I'll start to talk more about light, but you can actually visit an episode I did with Nathan Siles just recently in December of 2023. If you go to that episode, he talks about the light story. And I'm actually going to invite him on to talk about deuterium. He's got a much better understanding of deuterium. I'm sharing what I know about deuterium in terms of my knowledge and what's going to be helpful for you. Obviously, I guess Nathan will be able to fill in the gaps that I have in my knowledge. So what should you be consuming more of? Grass-fed animal fats, so ghee, butter, tallow, which is beef fat. So these types of fat. Then meats, eating the fats on the meats of these animals that are grass-fed, that's going to be helpful. So making sure, and then I guess on top of that, you've got nuts and seeds in terms of plant. So plant sources that are low in deuterium, nuts, seeds. What you want to avoid is the grains. Eat nuts, seeds, animal fat, grass-fed, meat that's grass-fed. Marbleized, for example, Wagyu beef that's grass-fed is good. That's good. Deuterium depleted or low in deuterium, minimal deuterium. And so start focusing your diet in these areas and really reducing the amount of deuterium in your diet through eliminating or minimizing carbohydrates. Water is the other thing, but you can get deuterium depleted water that you can drink. However, it's super expensive. I'd focus more on the food and then just drinking filtered water, but minimize, like not drinking too much water, not overdoing the water, because obviously water, particularly if you're near the sea, that's quite high in deuterium. Okay, if you're up in the mountains, that's got lower deuterium content, but at close to sea level, much higher deuterium. So hence not overdo the water consumption. Hence why excessive water consumption is not good for us, because we're going to be bringing in more deuterium. We don't want to do that. We want to minimize it. So I wouldn't be too concerned about the water side of things. I'd focus more on the foods, eating more fats, proteins, and that being, legumes. Legumes are going to be high in deuterium. So minimizing legumes. In terms of greens, you can eat anything green because the chloroblast, which is equivalent, the plant's equivalent to our mitochondria, the chloroplasts actually, and they're high, they're most concentrated in the green leafy parts of the plant, because that's where the plant is absorbing the sunshine, right, in order for the photosynthesis to take place. And what the chloroblasts do is obviously create energy that is deuterium depleted, or water that's deuterium depleted with it. And so the water that goes into the cytoplasm of the leaf, and it is low in deuterium. And what the plant does is then push the deuterium that it picked up from the water that it takes in into its fruit or the root vegetables. And so what consumes these? Typically birds. Birds consume a lot of these. Animals consume a lot of these. And in terms of children and teenagers, deuterium's okay if you're growing. So you can cope. I mean, obviously your mitochondria is more efficient when you're younger. So that's the other factor. But the other factor is the amount of growth that's going on in development. So deuterium actually helps facilitate that. Deuterium is an energy source. It just, we can't process it well as we get older, because our mitochondria becomes more and more inefficient as we age. And so with the young, yes, they can consume. So if you've got children or teenagers, okay for them to consume carbohydrates. It's as they pass that maturity of 25 years, that's when they want to start looking at reducing carbohydrate sources and increase fats and proteins and green leafy vegetables. So broccoli, low in deuterium, like cabbage, the real high chlorophyll ones, which have a lot of chloroblast. So that's the greenness. The greenness is the chlorophyll, right? So that's what you want to be eating. So kale's fantastic, baby spinach, all those sort of silver beet, those dark green leafy vegetables, broccoli are fantastic vegetables to consume because they're low in deuterium. And again, it's going to have the folate that your body needs. But if you start to venture into eating more animal foods, which is going to be beneficial in order to improve your mitochondria function, then starting to look at the different organ meats, because you'll pick up different minerals and vitamins from those organ meats, which are going to be supportive of your diet. So start looking at the different organ meats of these grass-fed animals. They need to be grass-fed animals. Otherwise, they're going to be sick animals, and you don't want to be eating sick animals. They're going to have high amounts of deuterium in them. So I hope this was really helpful in terms of providing some insight as to why the keto diet is so effective and why it will be really effective in terms of correcting any metabolic diseases, or if you just want to get more optimally well, more optimal wellness, then starting to look at this. So I've started to apply this. So I've cut right back on my fruit. I'm starting to increase my nuts. My nuts and seeds were fine. I had too much fruit consumption, so I'm really starting to cut back on the fruit consumption. I generally wasn't eating much carbohydrates, but I've really cut back on that. And I'm more focused. I wasn't eating much meats. So I'm going to increase my meat consumption this year of grass-fed animals and really start to note. So 2024 is going to be quite a shift for me. You can go along this journey with me. Join the Me and My Health Up Club, because this is where I'm going to be sharing more of my journey, and you can share your journey and we can start to share notes and learnings. And yeah, so go to the link and support the show in the link, and supporting the show will give you access to the Me and My Health Up Club. And that's a exclusive club for the Me and My Health Up listeners, that we get more deeper into the insights and how you can optimize your health and well-being. So I suggest you, go to the show notes, go to the link that says support the show at the bottom of the show notes. That will take you to the Me and My Health Up Club. Join the Me and My Health Up Club. Would love to have you part of my journey in 2024, because I want to take you on a journey, because 2023 has been a great journey for me and my health because of the Me and My Health Up. I've implemented a lot from what I've learned from the guests and from what I've taught myself through doing episodes myself. I obviously research each episode, and my health has improved out of sight. So I'm looking to take it to another level in 2024. And take you on this journey with me so that you can optimize your health. Let's do it together. Why not? So just wanted to share that insight around Deuterium. If you've got any questions, please email me, info@me&mywellness.com.au. If you can't find the link or whatever, please email me. If you've got some learning or some shares, please share that with me. Or if you want to learn more about this subject, please let me know, and we'll do some subsequent episodes on this subject. As I said, I'm going to get an expert, Nathan Siles, on this subject to fill in the gaps, my knowledge gaps, to enhance your health and well-being. And there's going to be a lot more around light next year. We're going to talk more about water and more about this quantum healing and optimizing your well-being through what we're understanding around quantum healing. So look forward to healthing up with you in 2024. Thanks for tuning in to this insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. Really appreciate your support and look forward to another big year around optimal health for all of us in 2024.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand Me and My Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. Me and My Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, Me and My Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of Me and My Health Up.